the dimly lit conference room of a gleaming skyscraper, Walter sat at the head of a mahogany table, his weathered hands trembling as he reviewed the latest reports. At 75, the self-made restaurant mogul could feel the weight of his empire slipping through his fingers. The quarterly meeting had just ended, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a bitter taste in his mouth that no amount of expensive coffee could wash away. "These numbers tell a story," he whispered to himself, his voice carrying the wisdom of 5 decades in the restaurant business. A story of betrayal. His eyes, still sharp despite his age, scanned the customer satisfaction reports showing plummeting ratings across his once prestigious chain of restaurants. As he gazed out the window at the setting sun, memories flooded back of his first restaurant, a humble diner where he'd personally greeted every customer, cooked every meal with love, and treated his staff like family. He'd started with nothing but determination and his grandmother's recipes, building his dream one plate at a time. Now, surrounded by luxury and success, Walter felt more empty than ever. His executives, with their fancy MBAs and cost-cutting strategies, had turned his life's work into a soulless operation. The final straw came when his assistant, Jenny, brought him a letter from a longtime customer expressing disappointment in how the restaurants had changed. "Time to remember who I really am," Walter declared, rising from his chair with newfound purpose. He pulled up the ratings of all his restaurants on his tablet. Searching for the worst-performing location, his eyes landed on one particular store where complaints about cold food and rude service had become the norm. A plan began forming in his mind. With determination gleaming in his eyes, Walter called his most trusted friend, Mr. Richard, a theatrical makeup artist he'd known since his early days. "I need your help," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "I'm going undercover." Hours later, Walter stood before a mirror in Mr. Richard's studio, barely recognizing himself. His silver hair had been transformed to a disheveled gray, his designer suit replaced with worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. His distinguished appearance had vanished, replaced by someone who might be dismissed as just another aging customer looking for a cheap meal. As the sun rose the next morning, Walter stood before the doors of his Target restaurant. Heart pounding with anticipation, he reached for the handle, ready to experience firsthand how far his dream had fallen. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Walter stepped into his once proud establishment, now a shadow of its former glory. The smell of burnt coffee and neglected cleaning duties assaulted his senses immediately. A group of teenagers occupied a corner booth, their uncleared dishes creating a precarious tower of plates and glasses. Eddie, the restaurant manager, leaned against the counter, absorbed in his phone while a line of customers grew at the register. His pressed uniform and polished name tag created a stark contrast to his apparent disinterest in the mounting chaos around him. A young mother struggled with a high chair while her toddler cried. Yet Eddie remained unmoved, scrolling mindlessly through his screen. In the midst of this dysfunction, Walter noticed Carla, a petite waitress with determined eyes, weaving between tables with grace. She stopped to help the struggling mother, earning a grateful smile. Her apron might have been worn, but her spirit remained unbroken. She greeted each customer with genuine warmth, remembering their usual orders and asking about their families. "Carla," Eddie's sharp voice cut through the dining room. "Stop chatting and pick up the pace. This isn't a social club." His words carried the sting of routine cruelty. Yet Carla maintained her composure, only the slight trembling of her hands betraying her hurt as she hurried to the kitchen. Walter settled into a booth with torn upholstery, his heart heavy as he watched a once profitable location crumbling under mismanagement. The menu he received was sticky, and several pages were stained with what appeared to be yesterday's special sauce. When Carla approached his table, her smile remained genuine despite Eddie's earlier outburst. "What can I get for you today, sir?" she asked, pulling out her notepad before Walter could respond. Eddie interrupted again. "Carla, table 12 has been waiting for their check for 10 minutes. He pointed accusingly at another section of the restaurant. "I'm sorry, I'll be right there." Carla apologized to Walter, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. As Walter observed the unfolding drama, an elderly gentleman with a cane entered the restaurant. The man stood patiently at the host station, waiting to be seated. Eddie glanced up from his phone, rolled his eyes, and shouted across the room, "Just sit anywhere." The elderly man, startled by the harsh response, slowly made his way to a table, his cane tapping softly against the sticky floor. Carla, despite her already overwhelming workload, rushed to assist him, earning another sharp rebuke from Eddie. "Stop babying the customers," Eddie snapped. "They can handle themselves, and those dishes aren't going to bust themselves." Walter's hands clenched into fists under the table as he watched the elderly man struggle with the heavy menu. This was more than poor service. It was the systematic destruction of everything he'd built his restaurants upon: dignity, respect, and genuine hospitality. The final straw came when Eddie deliberately ignored the elderly man's raised hand, pretending to be busy organizing already arranged menus. Walter could see the gentleman's shoulders slump in defeat, a sight that sent a jolt of recognition through him. How many other customers had given up on his restaurants this way? As Carla rushed past with a heavy tray of dishes, Eddie stuck out his foot slightly, causing her to stumble. Though she managed to keep the dishes from crashing, a glass of water spilled across the floor. "Clean it up," Eddie commanded with a smirk. "And try to be less clumsy." Walter's jaw tightened, his disguise suddenly feeling like a straitjacket restraining him from action. The elderly man was now trying to catch Eddie's attention for the third time, while Carla knelt to mop up the water, her shoulders shaking with suppressed tears. In the quieter afternoon lull, Walter nursed his third cup of coffee, documenting every concerning detail in mental notes. The coffee machine sputtered and wheezed, clearly overdue for maintenance. A young couple left their half-eaten meals, complaining about cold food as they walked past Eddie, who merely shrugged and returned to his phone when Carla approached to refill his cup. Walter gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Would you mind sitting for a moment? You look like you could use a break." His gentle tone reminded him of how he used to speak to his own employees decades ago. Carla glanced nervously at Eddie, who was now berating a kitchen staff member through the service window. "Just for a minute," she whispered, sinking into the booth. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her exhaustion. "How long have you been working here?" Walter asked, pushing his untouched slice of pie toward her. 3 years, Carla replied, unconsciously straightening her wrinkled apron. "It wasn't always like this. We used to have proper training, enough staff, quality ingredients." Her voice dropped lower. "Now they cut corners everywhere last week. They reduced our cleaning supplies budget. We're expected to maintain the same standards with half the materials." Walter's chest tightened as she continued. "My son has special needs." "And the medical bills." She blinked back tears. "I can't risk losing this job, even with Eddie's harassment. The health insurance is the only reason I stay." A loud crash from the kitchen interrupted their conversation. Eddie's voice boomed through the restaurant. "Who's going to pay for that waste of inventory?" "It's coming out of your paycheck." A young dishwasher emerged from the kitchen, his face red with humiliation. "It used to be different," Carla continued, twisting her worn wedding ring. "The previous manager, Mrs. Sarah, she treated us like family, but since corporate started pushing for higher profits..." She trailed off. Noticing Eddie's approaching footsteps, Walter watched as she hurried back to work, his coffee growing cold. Throughout the afternoon, he witnessed more disturbing scenes: Eddie falsifying temperature logs for the freezer, staff afraid to take their legally mandated breaks, and corners cut on food safety protocols. From his corner booth, Walter overheard fragments of conversation from the manager's office where Eddie was speaking on his phone. "Yes, sir, I understand the budget constraints. No, I've identified areas for further cuts. That waitress, Carla, she takes too long with customers, wastes time being friendly when she could be turning tables faster." Walter's hand trembled as he set down his cup. The coffee shop he'd started with 50 years ago had been built on the principle that every customer deserved to feel special. Every employee deserved dignity. Now, watching Eddie end his call with a smirk, Walter realized how far his company had strayed from its foundations as the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows. Eddie emerged from his office with a stack of papers, speaking in hushed tones to his assistant manager. "We'll let her go at the end of the week. Frame it as a performance issue. Can't have people thinking we're laying off single mothers. Bad for image." Walter's jaw clenched. The transformation that had felt like a costume earlier now felt like armor. protecting him while he gathered the evidence needed to save not just this restaurant, but his entire legacy. He watched Carla cheerfully serve another table, despite her obvious exhaustion, unaware that her dedication was being twisted into justification for her termination. The morning crowd had barely thinned when Walter returned. Settling into a different booth to maintain his cover, his trained eye noticed new issues: condensation dripping from a neglected air vent, flies buzzing around an overflowing trash bin, and a breakfast menu still displaying. Despite it being well past noon, when Carla approached, her smile slightly dimmed from yesterday's ordeal. Walter ordered the house special, a dish he'd personally created decades ago. 20 minutes later, what arrived bore little resemblance to his original recipe. The chicken was dry and tepid, swimming in a watery sauce that should have been rich and creamy. "Is everything all right, sir?" Carla asked. Noticing his frown, "I'd like to speak with the manager," Walter replied, his voice firm but kind. Eddie sauntered over, his name tag crooked on his wrinkled shirt. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, not bothering to mask his annoyance. "This isn't what I'd call acceptable food," Walter stated, sir. Gesturing to the plate, Eddie's face contorted into a condescending smirk. "Listen, old man, if you want 5-star dining, there's a fancy place downtown. This is a family restaurant. You get what you pay for." The surrounding customers turned to watch the confrontation, some nodding in recognition of similar experiences. A young mother at the next table pushed away her own untouched meal. "Every customer deserves quality, regardless of price," Walter responded, his disguised voice steady despite his rising anger. "Look," Eddie sneered, leaning closer. "We serve hundreds of people daily. If you don't like it, there's the door." Just then, a crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by Carla's startled cry. Eddie whirled around, his face reddening. "What now?" he bellowed, storming toward the noise. Carla stood amid shattered plates, having slipped on a greasy floor that should have been cleaned hours ago. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "The floor! You clumsy idiot!" Eddie shouted, his voice echoing through the now silent restaurant. "That's coming out of your paycheck. Maybe this will teach you to watch where you're going." Tears welled in Carla's eyes as she knelt to clean up the mess, her hands shaking. An elderly couple at a nearby table gasped at Eddie's outburst, while a teenage busboy froze mid-wipe, terror evident on his face. Walter rose slowly from his booth, his transformation makeup suddenly feeling like a mask he could no longer bear to wear. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe away the theatrical foundation. "That's enough." "Eddie?" Walter declared, his natural voice returning as he removed the last traces of his disguise. The restaurant fell into stunned silence as recognition dawned on their faces. "I'm Walter Anderson, owner of this restaurant chain." Eddie's face drained of color, his phone slipping from his trembling hands. "Mr. Anderson, I can explain. The explanations I've heard over the past 2 days are more than sufficient." Walter interrupted, his authority filling the room. He turned to address the gathered customers and staff. "I've spent the last 2 days watching how my life's work has been corrupted by greed and mismanagement." The elderly couple who had witnessed Carla's humiliation nodded in approval, while other customers began sharing their own experiences in hushed whispers. "You've cut corners on food quality," Walter continued, picking up the plate of his ruined signature dish. "You've mistreated loyal employees, falsified safety records, and destroyed the very essence of what these restaurants were meant to be, a place where every person, regardless of their means, deserves to be treated with dignity." Eddie stumbled backward, colliding with the counter. "The corporate mandates, the profit margins," he stammered. "Profits?" Walter's voice thundered through the restaurant. "I started this business with a single diner and a commitment to quality. We succeeded because we cared about our food, our people, and our customers. No spreadsheet can measure the cost of lost dignity." He turned to Carla, who stood frozen with a dustpan in her hands. "I apologize to you and to every employee who has suffered under this kind of leadership. This ends today." Facing Eddie again, Walter's expression hardened. "You're fired, effective immediately. Hand over your keys and badge." As Eddie fumbled with his name tag, a slow clap started from the elderly couple's table, spreading until the entire restaurant joined in. Carla pressed her hands to her mouth, tears of relief streaming down her face. Walter raised his hand for silence, his next words carrying the weight of promise. To everyone here, staff and customers alike, I give you my word that changes begin now. But first, he paused, reaching for his phone. His finger hovered over a contact labeled Regional Management, his expression grim with determination. The room held its breath, knowing that Eddie's termination was just the beginning. Walter's jaw set firmly. He had restaurants across the country, and if this location had fallen so far, how many others had suffered the same fate? The morning after Eddie's dismissal, Walter arrived early at the restaurant. Opening the blinds to let the dawn light stream through freshly cleaned windows, he found Carla already there, organizing the prep area with renewed energy. Your dedication didn't go unnoticed, Walter said, inviting her to join him at a corner booth. I've seen how you treat people, how you maintain your dignity despite adversity. That's exactly what I envisioned when I opened my first restaurant. Carla's eyes widened as Walter placed a new name tag on the table. Carla, General Manager, gleamed in gold letters. But sir, I've never managed before. When I started, I didn't know how to run a restaurant either. Walter smiled, his eyes twinkling. What I did have was heart. Just like you, the rest can be learned. Over the next few weeks, Walter personally mentored Carla. Together they renovated the space, replacing worn furniture and updating kitchen equipment. More importantly, they rebuilt the staff's broken spirit. Under Carla's leadership, training sessions became celebrations of service excellence rather than dreaded obligations. Remember, Walter advised during a staff meeting, every plate that leaves this kitchen carries our promise of quality. Every smile we share becomes part of someone's day. The transformation was remarkable. The kitchen staff, no longer afraid of reprimands, began experimenting with specials again. Servers shared genuine laughs with customers, and the dining room buzzed with the warm energy that Walter remembered from his early days. Carla implemented an employee recognition program, celebrating small victories and personal milestones. When a young server's child was sick, she adjusted the schedule without hesitation, remembering her own struggles as a working mother. One morning, as Walter watched Carla expertly handle the breakfast rush, his phone buzzed with customer reviews from other locations. His expression darkened as he read complaints eerily similar to what he'd witnessed here. Burnt coffee, indifferent service, cut corners. Is everything all right? Carla asked, noticing his concern. Walter stood, straightening his jacket with determination. I think it's time for me to do some traveling, he announced, already planning his next undercover visit. There are more Eddies out there, and more Carlas waiting to be discovered. 6 months later, Walter sat in the same booth where he'd first witnessed Eddie's cruelty, now barely recognizing the vibrant establishment before him. The restaurant hummed with positive energy. Servers moved with confidence. The kitchen operated like a well-oiled machine, and most importantly, customers' faces glowed with satisfaction. We've just received another 5-star review, Carla announced, sliding into the seat across from him. The pride in her voice matched the confidence in her posture, a far cry from the frightened waitress she'd been half a year ago. Read it to me, Walter encouraged, his heart swelling with pride. This place reminds me of the good old days, Carla read from her tablet. When restaurants cared about more than just turning tables, the food is excellent, but it's the warmth of the staff that keeps us coming back. It feels like family. A young mother approached their table, pushing a stroller. Mr. Walter, Carla, she beamed. I just had to thank you both. When you hired my sister last month, giving her a chance despite her past, it changed her life. She's talking about culinary school now. After the mother left, Walter shared his latest initiative with Carla. I've visited 32 locations now, he revealed, pulling out his notebook filled with observations. Some were worse than what we found here. Others just needed a gentle reminder of our values. But each visit confirms what I learned from you, Carla. One person who cares can transform an entire establishment. He paused, watching a new server carefully explain menu options to an elderly couple. The same couple who had witnessed Carla's humiliation months ago and now dined there weekly. "I'm creating a new training program," Walter continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just about procedures and profits, but about dignity, compassion, and the art of genuine service. And I want you to help develop it." Carla's eyes filled with tears. "You took a chance on me when others saw only a struggling single mother. Now I get to help others find their path." Walter stood surveying the dining room that had become a testament to his renewed purpose. The wealth he'd accumulated over decades felt insignificant compared to the rich tapestry of human connections he witnessed daily. Staff members supporting each other, customers becoming friends, lives being quietly transformed over cups of coffee and shared meals. "You know, Carla," he said softly, "I spent years checking profit margins, but I'd forgotten to measure what really matters. The moments of kindness, the restored dignity, the dreams rekindled. That's the true measure of success. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Hit that notification bell to never miss our next dramatic episode. Your support means the world to us."